Next item of business is Conservative Party debate on motion 21177 in the name of Jamie Green on the expansion of funded childcare. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jamie Green to speak to and move the motion for 13 minutes, time allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. From August this year, universal funded early learning and childcare for 3, 4 and vulnerable 2-year-olds will increase from 600 to 1,140 hours per child per year. The Scottish Government promises high-quality, flexible early learning that is accessible and affordable for all families. And for the most part, Presiding Officer, this policy was well-intentioned, it has been well-received, it enjoys broad political support and is largely viewed as a positive step towards encouraging parents back into the workplace and in closing that vital attainment gap. So far, so good. Hard to disagree with any of that, I hear you say. So why the urgency to debate this? Well, 2 years ago, Audit Scotland published a comprehensive report which looked at the increase from 475 to 600 hours that year and flagged several concerns about the then proposals to increase it to 1140. In 2018, on page 5 of that report, right up front, it said, and I quote, "There are significant risks that councils will not be able to expand to 1140. In particular, it will be difficult to increase the infrastructure and the workforce levels required in the limited time available." Just last week, Audit Scotland published their follow-up report, and on page 5 of that report, right up front, again, it states, "These plans are critically dependent on achieving much in a short time. This creates significant risks around getting people and buildings in place to deliver the expansion. It is likely that some aspects of this policy, such as delivering flexibility and choice, will not be implemented by August 2020. And therein lies the answer to why we're having this debate today. Detailed, well-researched, independent commentary 2 years ago from a respected institution highlighted the key challenges that faced the government back then. And 2 years on, those very same risks are repeated, almost word for word, in the 2020 report. Now, against the helpful backdrop of political consensus around the policy, today's debate is crucial in bringing to the attention of ministers the fact that out there in the real world, there are real concerns. Now, there is genuine goodwill in the Chamber today to support the rollout of these additional hours. But by ignoring our concerns, the government does so at its peril. Following the initial expansion of early years in other parts of the UK, there are many lessons to be learnt from that. Following the release of 2 in-depth Audit Scotland reports into the deliverability of the policy, one would think that the Scottish Government is armed with more than enough best practice, historic learnings and reality checks to have the very least the modesty to admit that this is proving to be one almighty challenging promise to deliver. But in the absence of that, as the Government's amendment predictably and disappointingly illustrates, the issues that we will highlight today will be ignored. Now, our motion positively welcomes the Government's ambition and it rightfully acknowledges the cross-party support it received and it continues to receive. But we also point ministers in the direction of Audit Scotland's report, which poses some basic but important elements of the rollout which pose a risk to its very success. Now, these mirror concerns of stakeholders that we have met and spoken to these past few weeks. Many eyes are on us today, such as the interest in getting this right. So I say to the government benches, please listen and let us help you get this right. Now, there's quite a lot to cover today. I'd like to choose just a few themes that strike me as the most pertinent and that should be the focus of our attention. The first, the report focuses on concerns over the infrastructure and the workforce requirements needed to deliver this policy fully on time. The second is the issue of sustainable funding and the role which funded providers play in all of this. And third, how the policy is being communicated between local authorities and early years providers. On that first point of infrastructure and resource, the Audit Scotland report raises serious concerns about whether local authorities will have the staff, the capital infrastructure and the networks in place to deliver the government's ambition in 5 short months. By September 2019, the number of staff recruited to meet council-delivered demand was at around 4,300. Around half of the 8,200 we know they need to be fully staffed. By any measure, that is some way off target. And that's before we discuss the funded provider sector, which is also struggling, Presiding Officer, as many staff are moving from the private to council settings. Now, I know the Minister is keen to wax lyrical about what the Scottish Government has done so far, and I know today she will no doubt point towards the increase in training opportunities and the government initiatives that are being held to improve recruitment. They are all very welcome, but the numbers speak for themselves. What started as an absolute guarantee by the Minister to deliver this policy by August 2020 has turned into, I'm confident we will deliver by August 2020, just last week. Confidence is one thing, ability to deliver is another. Quite how the government is going to double up its recruitment numbers in just a few short months is beyond me. The people aren't fully there, but nor is the infrastructure, the physical classrooms, the buildings, the shared back office systems, the billing and the financial reconciliation processes. We are some way behind on all of this. Audit Scotland could not have been clearer with us. Any delays will impact service delivery. And we're already starting to see this. In Renfrewshire, delays to a major refurbishment of Lochwinnock Nursery has local councillors worried about whether or not they will be able to cope with the increased demand placed upon them. A council-run nursery in North Ayrshire had 60 applicants for just 7 places. The cracks are already beginning to show. And the problem with loading capacity-building projects into these vital final few months means that any delay to these projects runs the risk of derailing delivery at the very last moment. The government talks about contingency planning in its amendment, but surely that is a thinly veiled admission that all is not well. What are these so-called contingency plans, and why do we need them? On the face of it, as I said, this policy sounds all very well and good. Few parents will complain that the nursery bills are dropping from £700 to £200 an hour, but this leads me to a crucial point in this debate, and that is of funding and sustainability. The Scottish Government was eager to promise that local authorities will pay a sustainable rate to funded providers, which will cover the true cost of running the services, which provides a living wage to staff and allows for future investment and expansion in their premises. But unless you've been living in a cave for the past 6 months, we know this is not playing out as it was intended. Partly because I know that some local authorities were clearly underfunded right from the outset. The Scottish Government tasked local authorities with setting out their financial projections or how much this expansion would cost to deliver in revenue and capital terms. They diligently costed their expansion and they submitted these to the Scottish Government. But 12 councils have found that they will receive less funding than they asked for, and 18 councils received less capital funding than they estimated was needed to increase capacity, as was the case in South Lanarkshire. But the big elephant in the room, Presiding Officer, is on the issue of funding, and that is the sustainability of the rate which funded providers are being offered to deliver the additional hours in return for signing up to the new scheme. The reality is that today many nurseries only survive by being able to top up the subsidised 600 hours per hour per child rate by being upfront with parents about the hourly rate that they will charge and being upfront about exactly what they will get for their money. Under the new contract, they will have to deliver the funded hours at the agreed rate of subsidy. No top-ups, no extra. And for many, to put it simply, the rate is less than the cost of providing the care and the learning. So we need to have a sensible discussion about what constitutes a sustainable funding rate and why there is so much unexplainable divergence across Scotland. To make ends meet, providers will face some stark choices, and none of them appeal to them very much. They can, of course, increase the rate they charge for additional hours over and above the 1140, and some have already done so by as much as 15%. 15%. That will inevitably hit those families who need more hours the hardest. They could, of course, reduce the quality of service to make ends meet. As one nursery described it at the moment, parents get bells and whistles, they get high-quality, freshly prepared food, and tons of extracurricular activities. On this new rate, they may have to charge extra for these services or reduce the quality of the entire experience. And we know who the losers are in that equation. The very people that the funded hours seek to help in the first place are those who can least afford the extras. Many providers will give preference to applicants for places who want full-time provision or require more hours. And that will hit those parents who only want to work part-time or study part-time. The Scottish Government promised, through all of this, a provider-neutral approach to ensure that funding follows the child, through whichever means those parents choose. And the Government will no doubt, I hear, stick to those lines today. But the reality on the ground is that providers have no way of tracking the child, tracking the money, or tracking the hours. And the third point I'd like to raise is that of communication, consultation, and the rollout itself. Providers raise their concerns with us. Providers raise their concerns with the Government. The Scottish Government is quite simply failing in its duty to foster relationships between providers and the funding authorities. The Education Committee of this Parliament itself, in its stakeholder outreach, found that there is major tension between local authorities and many providers. Many private and third sector nurseries feel as though they are being ignored by decision makers, and I know the Government knows there is tension there, but it cannot abdicate itself of that fundamental responsibility to ensure that all providers of ELC are funded properly, as they claim this policy does. The final point I will make today is what is the point, Presiding Officer, of expanding early years funding? The point of expanding it, the Government say, is to improve the attainment of our children, okay, encourage parents back into work and study, great, and improve family well-being. These are admirable aims, but they also must be measurable. The Audit Scotland report rightfully raises concerns about the absence of a robust strategy or the baseline data needed to properly analyse short, medium and the long-term success of this policy. If we cannot confidently analyse outcomes, how will we ever know if this investment truly offered value for money? Presiding Officer, I've barely scratched the surface of some of the ground that we need to cover today. Since this expansion was first mooted by ministers, ELC providers have been very forthcoming and very vocal about their issues in recruitment and sustainability and their concerns over maintaining high levels of quality of care that I know they want to provide. All of these concerns have been vindicated in not one but two Audit Scotland reports. Now, these benches will work constructively with the Government on helping them deliver this policy, but that requires the Government to constructively work with those tasked of delivering the policy. The nothing-to-see attitude in the Government's amendment is unsustainable and untenable, Presiding Officer, because I will take no joy in coming back to this chamber in 5 months and saying to the Minister, I told you so. But unless the Government benches listen, and listen carefully to what is said today in this debate, I fear I may be doing just that. I move the motion in my name.
I now call on Marie Todd to speak to and move Amendment 21177.3 for 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In September last year, 50,000 children across Scotland were already benefiting from additional high-quality early learning and childcare. High-quality learning and care that we know from international evidence can transform their lifelong outcomes. The expansion is already happening. Nurseries have been and continue to be extended, refurbished and built. Staff at all levels have been and continue to be recruited. But the most important thing, the reason that this Parliament supports this policy, is that children are already benefiting and many more will benefit from this August. Yes, there is still much to do, but by continuing to work closely with our partners in local government, as we have done from the very beginning, we are confident of successful delivery of the expansion of early learning and childcare in Scotland. Audit Scotland recognised the progress that we have made in their report last week. I'd like to start by reading out the first 2 lines of the key messages in that report, which say, Scottish Government and councils are making steady progress to deliver the expansion of funded early learning and childcare. One moment. At a national level, progress is broadly in line with plans to deliver the increased hours by August 2020.
Daniel Johnson.
Thank the Minister for giving way. I was just wondering if she would consider that steady progress is enough, given that only 40% of the children are receiving the hours, and that means that the provision will need to more than double by August.
Marie Todd.
As we'll go on to explain during this debate, I am absolutely confident that we will deliver in August 2020, and I'll give you the reasoning why. The report goes on to remark that there is effective national oversight of this expansion. It is right that Parliament today debates the challenges in delivering such an ambitious transformation programme, but first let us recognise what has already been achieved. This progress is testament to the hard work and commitment of Team ELC. Let me put on record some of the results of that hard work and commitment to date. 50,000 children already benefiting from additional hours. 4,310 full-time equivalent staff in post a year before delivery. And we know that hundreds more have been recruited since the September data collection. Around 5,000 additional college university places in ELC over the last 3 academic years. Year-on-year growth in ELC modern apprenticeships with over 2,000 new starts last year. 361 capital projects already complete. Private and third sector partners now expected to deliver 28% of total places, up 4 percentage points on original forecasts. Real progress, real achievements created through real partnership through the whole system. I will give way.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
I thank the Minister for taking that intervention. She'll be aware that the PD Breeks Nursery in Orkney is scheduled to close in July. Can I ask her what consultation or discussion she's had with the local council about meeting the gap there? And is she still confident of meeting the expended hours by August, given that the closure of that very important nursery?
Marie Todd.
So as I understand it from communication with the local authority there, they are confident that there are places available in the system already, despite the closure of that nursery, because of the dereliction order on the building that they operate from. In terms of the risks, I have always recognised that delivering such a major transformation programme is not without risk. Effectively managing risk is key to successful delivery of any major public reform. Audit Scotland has highlighted 2 key areas of risk around infrastructure and workforce. There are risks that we have already not only identified, but also designed robust actions to address and mitigate. Let me take each in turn. Infrastructure. The data on capital projects in the Audit Scotland report is from October 2019. Significant progress has been made since then. Councils now tell us that as of January 2020, 40% of all capital projects are already complete, 3% ahead of projections. Good risk management demands good contingency planning. Again, clear progress since October. In January, councils had robust contingency plans in place for all critical projects due to complete this summer. Turning now to workforce. Certainly.
Jamie Green.
Saying councils have robust contingency plans is one thing. What are these robust contingency plans? Where are the places? Where are the children actually going to go?
Marie Todd.
So the member will be aware that they are perfectly at liberty to explore the robust contingency plans with the local authorities in the areas that they operate. I have been assured by my work and on the Joint Delivery Board have absolutely been assured that there are robust contingency plans in place for critical infrastructure. Why don't you ask your local authority? Why don't you work with your local authority just as I am? Okay, workforce. Workforce. Turning now to workforce. It bears repeating that over half the required workforce are already recruited, and I am sure that Parliament would agree that prudent use of public money requires national and local government to plan the phasing of recruitment so that staff are in post for when they are needed. Certainly.
I'm very grateful.
Oh, is it right? Liam Kerr? Yeah.
In March 2018, I asked the Minister if she would guarantee local authorities would not be short-staffed. And she said, I will absolutely give a guarantee that we will find ourselves with enough staff by 2020. Does she stand by that guarantee?
Marie Todd.
Yes, I do guarantee that we will not find ourselves short of staff by August 2020. I know that there are concerns about movement of staff from private and third sector settings to local authorities. I want to assure all providers that everything that we do nationally to support the ELC workforce, we do it to support every sector, private, public and voluntary. More training places, free advertising for private providers, councils growing their own are all part of the solution. Yes.
Mary Fee.
I'm grateful to the Minister for taking an intervention. What does the Minister have to say to the childminding sector, who are already expressing grave concerns about the delay in issuing guidance and where they actually fit within this expansion, given that they are already losing children to council settings?
I can give you more time to cover for the interventions, Minister. Marie Todd.
Thank you. Certainly, we'll come on to the issue of childminders, but childminders are expected to more than double the proportion of ELC that they provide in the national picture. There are more childminders registered with as partner providers with the local authorities than ever before, and this is an opportunity for me to highlight yet again that childminding is absolutely a fabulous choice for any family who want to choose to use their childcare hours with a childminder. There is more that we can do, and I am listening, and I will act. Our updated delivery support plan will include further actions to support our partner providers across the country and address recruitment and retention challenges. I want to say a few words on partnership. No single part of our early learning and childcare system in Scotland could deliver this policy alone. That is why it's encouraging to see Audit Scotland conclude that the Scottish Government, COSLA, councils and other stakeholders are continuing to work well together. I genuinely believe we are on track because we are working effectively together, and that we is broad. It's government, councils, public bodies, private, voluntary nurseries and our childminders and more. It's Team ELC. I know there remains much work to do. I'm confident that with the continued close partnership working that has characterised this expansion so far, we are on course to deliver the most generous, high-quality early learning and childcare offer in the UK, which can transform the lives of our children. I know this Parliament cares as deeply as I do about the future of our citizens in Scotland. I know that we agree the investment in our citizens' earliest years because of the benefits it will bring to children, to their families and to their parents. I challenge other members contributing to the debate today to ensure that children remain at the heart of their contributions and at the heart of their scrutiny of our progress in building a system of high-quality, expanded early learning and childcare. Because this policy is not about buildings or recruitment or hours or even the flexibility of those hours, simply for their own sake. This policy is about improving children's lives. From day one, this policy has had quality at its heart because we know we will only improve children's lives if the experience of ELC day in, day out is of the highest quality. These benefits will be felt in every community in Scotland, and it's right that across Parliament there is support for such a transformational policy. I move the amendment in my name.
I now call on Mary Fee to speak to and move Amendment 21177.1 for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to open this debate for Scottish Labour today. And we have long supported the ambitions behind the early learning and childcare expansion to 1140 funded hours. And with only 5 months until the expansion's deadline, the Audit Scotland report is a timely intervention. And Scottish Labour welcomes the finding of the follow-up report into early learning and childcare, as we did the initial report in 2018. And both reports show the scale of the expansion of funded ELC and the challenges faced then and now. And as such, we thank the Conservatives for using their debate time once again to discuss the Audit Scotland report and the overall expansion. We will be supporting the motion this evening and ask for support for our amendment, which seeks to raise a crucial issue surrounding payment of the living wage. And the Audit Scotland report highlighted a range of risks and issues with the expansion, and the Tory motion reflects on these. However, we feel it's vital that what we see as a loophole, highlighted by Audit Scotland, is closed. And legal advice shows that private providers may not have to pay their staff the living wage, and we want the Scottish Government to acknowledge this loophole and set out how they plan to address this in the coming months. And, Presiding Officer, the Audit Scotland report sets out a range of recommendations based on its findings. And we hope the Government and Councils act on these recommendations and minimise the consequences that risk this expansion. And the most significant challenge facing the expansion is the recruitment of staff and the building of infrastructure projects. And it is disappointing that with only a matter of months until the August 2020 deadline, these problems continue to be raised, showing that the initial policy, as welcoming as it was hastily thrown together without any real action plan behind the policy when it was introduced. And in the next 4 to 5 months, the number of additional staff required in council settings is estimated to be over 2,200, around 27% of the full-time equivalent staff required for the whole expansion. And that is a major challenge for councils, yet it's not the only recruitment challenge. And partner providers report a series of problems with recruitment and retention. Councils expect these providers to play a larger role in the expansion, meaning that these challenges become more problematic. And in West Scotland region, I have heard anecdotal evidence that some private nursery staff are leaving for council-run nurseries. And this is not restricted to my region, and the Audit Scotland report points out the worries of funded providers, as they and other organisations have reported many times in the last few years. Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the member for taking my intervention? Can I just place on the record that we will be supporting the Labour amendment? I think it's a very valid point to make, but the reality is that funded providers in the private sector are really struggling to deliver on the new rates that are made available to them. So would the member agree with me that there is that ambition to provide and pay their staff more, to try and retain them, stop them moving to council sectors, but they need to be adequately funded in the first place?
Mary Fee.
I'm grateful to Jamie Green for that intervention. I think it's obvious that funders and providers need to be able to pay their staff the living wage. They need to be properly supported and funded by local authorities, and that is an issue that needs to be examined further as we go forward. But the anecdotal evidence points that some of the staff that are returning to the private sector after a few months. Now, this might be slightly helpful to some providers. However, it does raise further questions about the sustainability of funded providers and the recruitment and the retention of council-run services. And the movement of staff between sectors needs to be better monitored at a national and a local level, and the planning for this should have started long before now, with effective plans in place. And the challenges around recruitment and retention for funded providers risk the sustainability of these very services. And this would be a massive loss to staff and to children, and most importantly, to their families. And, Presiding Officer, the biggest risk of the expansion surrounds the infrastructure projects that are due for completion before August 2020, just 5 months from now. And Audit Scotland tell us that the infrastructure risk has risen to the maximum level, with half of the places expected to be created through infrastructure projects are due to be ready between July and August. And according to the Audit Scotland report, this equates to 303 projects. And of these projects, 250 are warned to be critical to meeting the expected demand. And we also find out that there are a lack of contingency plans in place for many of these projects. And Audit Scotland tell us that 83 are expected to be completed in the short space of time until August, with another 39 projects not having such assurances. And, Presiding Officer, Audit Scotland did highlight that Brexit would have an impact on the building work, but we also face a greater threat, not realised in that report, and that is the potential spread of the coronavirus. And I accept that the Scottish Government, like the rest of us, would not have factored a global pandemic in their planning. Yet they knew the risks of the infrastructure programme in 2018, when Audit Scotland released their initial report. And 2 years later, those risks are the most pressing issue, with a matter of months until the deadline. And, Presiding Officer, Audit Scotland tell us that this expansion was ambitious. We have concerns that the speed of the expansion may have been poorly conceived, and the expansion poses risks to the sustainability of partner providers and childminders. It is teetering on the edge, and the only way we will find out the success or failure is through the experience of children and their families. And the Scottish Government has 5 months to get this right, and 5 months to prevent families from being let down. And they must listen to the recommendations from Audit Scotland and listen to Parliament today. Scottish Labour wants to see the best quality childcare led by committed, dedicated and well-paid staff. I move the amendment in my name.
Call Alison Johnson for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to the Scottish Conservatives for using their business time this afternoon to enable us to debate progress, the progress of the expansion of funded childcare. If we deliver this policy properly, fully, that means the hours and the flexibility, then the lives of more children and families can be transformed. Families are, and more will be able to spend more on food, on housing, on leisure. They may be able to afford working fewer hours. They may be able to spend more time together. The Convention on the Rights of the Child tells us that a child has a right to develop to the maximum extent possible, and one way we can help our youngest citizens develop to the maximum extent possible is by ensuring that they and their families have access to high quality early learning and childcare delivered by well-trained staff being paid at least a living wage in buildings that really work for those working in them and those learning in them. Now this is, and it has to be, a partnership effort where local authorities, the independent and the voluntary sector are at the heart of delivering a government policy. But the government needs to be absolutely clear that the buildings and the workforce exist to deliver this transformative policy. Now the Minister suggests that if we wish to learn more about the robust contingency plans, we should ask local authorities, but I would expect the greatest of oversight from the Minister, and I would expect that she should be able to explain this to the Chamber. As we've heard, and according to Audit Scotland, infrastructure poses the largest risk to the 1140 hours offering. Their 2018 report found that getting enough buildings and facilities in place to deliver the increase in hours was a risk. They tell us that this remains the case, and that this risk is very likely to occur and will have a very high impact. Now, the data provided by Council shows that as of October last year, only around 30% of infrastructure projects were complete. It is certainly the case that much of the Scottish Government's plans rest on being able to achieve a great deal in a very short space of time. The Audit Scotland report states that almost half of the places to be created through infrastructure development are due to be ready between July and August this year. And this very challenging timescale creates its own pressures. It not only increases the likelihood of any delay directly affecting the services available in August, but also means that a large volume of new places will be maybe being registered at once, which could create capacity issues for the Kier Inspectorate. And of course, as we've heard, buildings are where this important work takes place. But it's the workforce who make our nurseries, who look after and help our youngest children develop. But challenges, that important workforce challenges in all sectors remain. In September 2019, as has been mentioned, Council still needed to recruit about half of the additional staff required for the expansion. And Mary Fee is quite right. Brexit is likely to have an impact on this. Around 7% of the daycare of children workforce are estimated to be non-UK EU nationals. And given the significant numbers of additional staff who must be recruited to achieve 1140 hours, any reduction in the workforce could significantly delay these plans. I do note that the Tory amendment doesn't mention this. Now, the excellent briefing from Close the Gap for today's debate stresses the need to end the extreme gender segregation in the ELC workforce if we're to deliver this policy. And they tell us that if more men are to work in the care sector, there needs to be an economic imperative to do so, with appropriately remunerated jobs with clear progression pathways as evidence that this is a good career choice. Women continue to comprise 90% of the ELC workforce, and I would argue, Presiding Officer, that they continue to be undervalued and underpaid. Now, Scotland is striving to be a better place for children and young people to grow up in. Initiatives like the Baby Box are warmly welcomed, as are payments for the Best Start grant. But this debate that we're having this afternoon is taking place within the context of increasing child poverty, so each and every measure we take to improve the lives of Scotland's young people, it's really important. You know, I wish we had more time to look at the food that could be produced and shared and eaten in our nursery schools. You know, why are we building nursery schools without kitchens? What is the impact of this expansion on closing the attainment gap? I will support the Conservative amendment this afternoon. It is factual, and I understand why the Minister has focused on the positive findings within the report, and there are many. I agree with her, of course, that it will be challenging delivering this, but I'm unconvinced that the Minister fully appreciates the scale of the challenge we face. I don't have much time left, but I'd just like to finish by thanking those who work in childcare. I volunteered in my daughter's nursery school some time ago now. At that time, there was no flexibility. It was 2.5 hours per day. I used to go in on a Thursday morning. I'd help prepare snacks. I'd read a story. I was always absolutely exhausted at the end of that 2.5 hours. I appreciate how hard yet rewarding the work is and how deserving all who work in the sector are of fair pay and the best of training and ongoing support. I would also like to, I've been contacted by constituents, very briefly, who are concerned at the ongoing lack of flexibility from a mum who wants to work 2 full days but who has been offered 5 mornings. It doesn't match with her requirements. And the issue of the sustainable rate has been brought up with me from nurseries within my own region and out with. If we want to deliver this policy, it has to be sustainably funded. And Presiding Officer, I appreciate that I must draw up my remarks to a close. Thank you.
Call Beatrice Wishart for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Jamie Green for giving Parliament the opportunity to debate the Government's progress in expanding early learning and childcare. I'd like to reiterate that the expansion is an important policy that my party wants to see fully realised. High-quality childcare provision is essential to giving all young people the best start in life. It's one of the best investments we can make. But as has been discussed in Parliament before, there are many issues that raise questions not about the direction of travel, but about how we are getting there. The guiding principles of the ELC expansion are quality, affordability, flexibility and accessibility. As has been noted, Audit Scotland reports that it is likely that flexibility and choice for parents will not be fully implemented by August 2020. Just this week, I was contacted by a parent who described why, come August, their child will not be using their full 1140 hours entitlement at a local authority nursery. They would like to use the remainder of the hours during school holidays at a private nursery that will be a partner provider. They've been told by their local authority that they cannot use the remaining hours at that nursery, so will have to pay for the care themselves, or remove the child from the nursery where the child is settled and enrol full-time at the private nursery. That doesn't represent flexibility or affordability. Presiding Officer, there's an urgent need for the Government to clarify guidance to local authorities to make sure that they're informing parents correctly. This is another example of a take it or leave it that I'm worried will be the experiences of too many parents from August. I noted the Minister's careful choice of words during topical questions last week when she said, and I quote, "I expect flexibility and choice to continue to expand," unquote. Presiding Officer, parents won't be satisfied with having to wait for some date in the distant future for childcare hours that work for them. Parents need to know now what will be available to them in the local authority so they can make plans. August is only 5 months away. The Government has data from each local authority on the progress they are making to get ready for August 2020. It's frustrating that this important information is out of the public domain. We've been told by the Improvement Service in their most recent progress report in December, quote, there is significant variability seen across the country. But, Presiding Officer, that's not detailed enough. We need to be able to hold ministers to account. Scottish Liberal Democrats have lodged a series of parliamentary questions to try to get this information. I asked the Minister in the Chamber last week if she will allow us to see the data. We've been told that the Government has no plans to place a copy of the information in SPICE, and that withholding the data is in the public interest. I reject the idea that hiding the data is in the public interest. So will the Minister commit today to publishing the data? I have another question to ask the Minister. Right now, parents who choose to defer their child's entry to school will be paying for childcare because the local authority did not approve funding for another year of ELC. Others still will be choosing to send their children to school against their better judgment because they cannot afford to pay for childcare. I've written to the Minister to ask that parents who have had to pay childcare be reimbursed. So can the Minister give an indication of whether she's considered the proposal? And can she explain why an SSI can't be brought to Parliament this year that would guarantee parents who exercise their right to defer automatically receive funding? Presiding Officer, we cannot end up in a rush to the finish line. As Mary Fee has pointed out, we now know that there are 250 infrastructure projects which are critical to meeting demand due to be completed between June and August, and 83 of those projects have no contingency plan. Between April and September, councils will need to recruit 27% of the additional staff needed. Quality must continue to be at the forefront if we are to improve outcomes for our youngest children. I support the motion and the call for government to urgently address the issues that have been highlighted this afternoon.
We now move to the open debate, and that's speeches of 6 minutes, please. I have a little time to allow for interventions. And I call on Claire Adamson to be followed by Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I do welcome the opportunity to debate this policy this afternoon because it is one of the most important policies from our last manifesto. I think the introduction of 1140 hours and expanded childcare is going to be transformational for the lives of many, many of our citizens. And there is nothing more important than that, in my mind, in terms of what we do as legislators, as politicians, and in supporting our communities. It is absolutely vital that we tackle the attainment gap. It's absolutely vital that we reduce poverty. And this policy will allow more parents into work and give them the opportunity to take advantage of the workplace, but it also will ensure that the very highest quality of education is given to our young people at the earliest opportunity. I do want to repeat the Minister's quote from the report, in that it says that the Scottish Government and Councils are making steady progress to deliver the expansion of funded early learning and childcare. At a national level, progress is broadly in line with the plans to deliver increased hours by August 2020. The progress is being made, and we can already look to the 50,000 children already in receipt of expanded childcare. As member taken in, Mr. Whittle.
Brian Whittle.
Sorry, it's not to me to promote you. I can thank Claire Adams for taking that intervention. In a previous debate in this chamber, you raised concerns yourself about the sector within your own constituency. So, are you now comforted by what's been said? Do you think that are you happy that this is going to be delivered in your sector against what you said the last time we debated this?
Can we always speak through the chair, please, Mr. Whittle?
Thank you, President Officer. Can I say to Mr. Whittle, I believe that every single one of us in this chamber is absolutely focused on delivering the best for our young people, and that involves scrutiny, and it involves taking on board what's been said by Audit Scotland. But I go back to it, they were making the steady progress that they expected. If things had stalled, if we were in a position that was worse than the previous Audit Scotland report, believe me, it would say that in this report. And I think it's really, really disingenuous of politicians to demand guarantees right now. We are facing one of the biggest unknown challenges that we are faced as a population, because we don't know what's going to happen with the coronavirus. And that could have impact on all sorts of areas. And to pretend that that's not another risk that is now facing us is completely and utterly disingenuous. And I really thank both Mary Feary and Alison Johnson for recognising also that Brexit has paid an impact on how we are delivering this work. And that includes people in the building trade that are delivering on some of the capital investments. But it also means without free movement of people, we can't recruit and encourage people to come to Scotland and work in what is going to be a transformational childcare opportunity. And yes, there are challenges. And as convener of the Education and Skills Committee, I listened to our focus groups, and I listened to the concerns of childminders, and I listened to the concerns of the private providers, and we took that back to the government, and they have listened, and they are working with them, and they're trying to get solutions to these issues. And it's incumbent on all of us to mark the progress that has been made and the work that has been done, and to actually try and give some reality to parents that this is an opportunity, an amazing opportunity for the young people, and one that we are working as hard as we very can to deliver. I think this is so important because when you look to the anticipated outcomes of this policy, it is about early learning and childcare of the highest quality. And that means we have to look to the Fair Work agenda and ensure that people are being paid well for the work that they're doing that is crucial for our young people. And I take no apology for that equal pay guarantee being asked of private providers. And I take on board Mary Fee's concerns regarding this, that, this is something that we feel very, very positive about. And if there is a differential between our local authorities who are paying the real living wage and the private sector, then those business models will need to be examined, because we must have people having a fair work agenda, a fair work entitlement attached to employment in these areas. We're trying to make this affordable for all parents. And we've just had budget setting. There's been talk about the tax changes and who pays more tax, who pays less tax. This is £4,500 of investment in our young people. And from my discussions anecdotally with, sadly not my own friends, since I'm a bit out of that generation, but my children's friends and the children of friends that I have who are about to benefit from this, or indeed are already benefiting from this. And it has made a immense difference to the capabilities of their family, because they have that funded place and they know that the place is secure and of high quality for their children. And the flexibility is there and is important. And the fact that we have built into this the funding follows the child model gives parents a flexibility and an option to choose what is best for them. I'm afraid I'm just over time. Thank you. Thank you, President.
Michelle Ballantyne, followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Jamie Green set out at the beginning of this debate the background and the reasons for it. And I want to start by saying that all too often, a policy that sounds good on paper is actually hard to implement in practice. And it may create unintended consequences, or it may challenge the very things that it seeks to promote. The 1140 hours policy does have broad support, because we know that a good start in life can make an enormous difference to a child's life chances, both socially and economically. However, to deliver the desired aims, we must ensure that the policy buttresses the work and capability of providers, both in the public, private, voluntary sectors. This policy is teetering on the edge of failing to achieve these goals. And whilst I have listened to the Minister's repeated assurances that all is well, I would respectively suggest to her that her obstinate position that all is well fails to engage with some of what is underpinning the weaknesses of this rollout. And in doing so, the Minister may be endangering the very things that the policy seeks to deliver. I have visited many nurseries, and I see excellent progress on the provision of good quality environments and early learning education. And I agree, there is huge commitment by local authorities and the private and third sectors to give our children the best start. Quality of delivery for children was always at the heart of nurseries. And I would remind the Minister that the policy to underpin quality standards in this policy came later. Many of the providers were working without clarity of role or without clarity of standards long before they came in. And you've had to rely on the goodwill of those partners during this rollout. But today I want to talk about the flexibility and choice, which was at the heart of the original proposition, but is now the area which threatens to be lost if actions aren't taken. The principle was that funding would follow the child, and I've just heard it repeated by the last speaker. But parents who work know that childcare can be needed from the first year of their child's life, and they require the hours that are flexible and that can cover a full working day and travel time, wraparound care that is accessible, and that allows them to be confident that their children will thrive. This policy provision is for 3- and 4-year-olds. Sorry? Yes, quickly.
Mary Fee.
I'm grateful to the member for taking an intervention. Would the member agree with me that the issue of flexibility is crucial to lone parents, 91% of whom are women?
Michelle Ballantyne.
I absolutely would, and this is where I have much of my concerns around the rollout of this policy, because local authority provision is inevitably focused on that age group, the 3- to 4-year-olds, and less than 10% of local authority provision provides the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. provision that working parents, particularly lone women who need a full-time job, may require. But you see, when the government handed control over the 1140 policy delivering its funding to local authorities, without a plan, I hasten to add, it made the market subordinate to the local authorities' priorities and needs. And as a result, parental choice and flexibility were put at risk, not through ill will, but due to the challenges of delivering the policy. Local authorities now have just over 5 months to recruit 2,000 full-time equivalent staff in order to meet the government's target. And more pressingly, the current timetable requires nearly 50% of funded places to be made available over the course of just 1 month between July and August this year. Where do you think those staff are going to come from? Because while local authorities invest in new facilities and offer competitive salaries to attract the staff they need, the Scottish Government have made clear that over a quarter of those additional funded hours will need to be delivered by private funded providers. Now, with partner provider contracts and payments rates decided and set locally, we can see inconsistencies right across Scotland. Similarly, the financial templates for funding, which were developed individually by councils, but then were adjusted by Scottish Government using population figures from 6 years ago, means that councils with rapidly growing populations are now being unnecessarily squeezed. Midlothian, for example, has been awarded 24% less funding than its original financial template required. Now, I know the Minister will stand up at the end and say that funding packages were agreed by COSLA, and that is absolutely true, but it doesn't change the reality on the ground. For many nurseries, the funded partnership rates are set below the normal rate that they would have charged in the marketplace, a rate that would sustain their businesses, and this is then compounded by 3-year funding templates that do not provide for inflation increases, a reality which does have consequences. The cost of childcare for under 3s will potentially have to increase to cover running costs, and this is an area that local authorities are not investing in. Nurseries, particularly in the third and private sectors, will struggle to generate enough revenue surpluses to maintain and improve their services, particularly the replacement of equipment and facilities. And we may see a loss of innovation in the sector following a decline in revenue. It is important to remember that the principles of Montessori, Steiner, and outdoor learning have all influenced our state provision, and these have been done with the flexibility of the private sector. Senior experienced staff equally have faced downgrading their roles or leaving the service because they didn't meet the new national qualification requirements, despite having, in some cases, excellent reports from inspectors. And many of the nurses I've spoken to have reported instances of settings facing the loss of up to 50% of their staff as they found themselves unable to compete with the local authority salaries. And they don't blame their workers for leaving and moving to higher paid jobs. But this situation threatens to snuff out one of the most enlightened principles of the 1140 expansion, parental choice. If a range of providers are unable to meet the staffing demands of the policy, parents will have no choice but to access their funded hours from a limited pool of providers who may be unable to deliver the flexibility promised by the policy. This will stifle parents' ability to tailor childcare to the needs of their children and force them to make difficult decisions about their family life. If I were to accept the government's arguments in this chamber that there is no more money to fully fund the needs of nurseries, and that the government must consider whether it's, then the government must consider whether its policy restrictions of not allowing top-up fees or independent nurseries not being able to choose how many funded hours they offer during their opening hours, then you will destroy the very policy you have set out to deliver.
Rona Mackay, followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Transformation in Early Years Learning plan for this year is hugely important, and I'm pleased that the Conservative Party have brought this debate to the Chamber, despite the gloom and doom we just heard from the last speaker. Their motion recognises the strong cross-party support for the policy of 1140 hours of free childcare and acknowledges that we all want the best start in life for our children. Indeed, this policy provides a historic opportunity for Scotland. No other policy has such potential to transform the lives of children and their families while improving the prospects of Scotland's economy in the long and short term. An initiative of this magnitude will have and has had its ups and downs along the way, but nothing in the Audit Scotland report suggests that the 1140 hours expansion can't be delivered in time, and the Minister has said that she's confident that from this August, all 3- and 4-year-olds and around 1/4 of 2-year-olds will benefit. In fact, of the 10 recommendations in the report, 1 is already complete, and a further 7 refer to work we already have underway before Audit Scotland reported last year in October. Local authorities have worked constructively with the government to make this happen and should be commended for their hard work in implementing this transformational but fairly complex process. The Audit Scotland report quite rightly highlighted that there may be some risk of delays in certain areas surrounding building and staffing, but it did recognise that huge progress had been made. I know that in my own constituency of Strathkelvin and Bearsden. Yes.
Liam Kerr.
Point that Rona Mackay made, does she agree that the handling of this policy has forced a particular approach on the recruitment from local authorities with which private nurseries simply don't have the resources to compete?
Rona Mackay.
Well, I mean, I think that's something that should be have been arranged during the negotiations. As we know, it was done through COSLA. And that is something that, that will have to be addressed. I understand that there are issues in that area, but it should not compromise such an amazing, fantastic initiative. The Audit Scotland report quite rightly highlighted this. I know that my own constituency of Strathkelvin and Bearsden, huge progress has been made since the report was written in October last year. And it's important to remember too that in many areas, as the Minister said, my own constituency included, the 1140 hours has been operating successfully in pilot projects in selected nurseries. So the Government is engaged with people who we depend upon to make it work and address earlier concerns, many of which we've debated here in the last couple of years. At this stage of the process, much of the practical elements around buildings and process are in the hands of local authorities, but of course our door would always be open to listen to those authorities experiencing difficulties on aspects of the implementation. With regards to staffing, the Chamber knows that the Government has embarked on a massive recruitment drive to train early years practitioners, and this is ongoing. There's no doubt that being a qualified early years practitioner is a highly skilled and vitally important profession. Gone are the days when nursery teachers or childminders were thought of as glorified babysitters. Our children deserve better, and we're giving them the best. Quality of teaching matters, and an understanding of the importance of trauma-informed learning is vital to the role amongst many other things. But I agree entirely with Mary Fee that private providers should be able to pay the living wage. All practitioners should be paid the living wage. Increased flexibility will allow families to make choices, huge savings in childcare costs, and amazing benefits to children's social development and well-being will be gained by this transformative policy. Presiding Officer, It may sound a cliche, but it's true. The Scottish Government is striving to make Scotland the best country in the world to be a child and for them to grow up in. Policies like the baby box and the expansion of the early years provision are paramount to that and crucial in growing our economy, closing the attainment gap and tackling inequality. Presiding Officer, this is about our children and our grandchildren's futures, and it really is more important than politics. So let's not cast doubt on this groundbreaking initiative. Let's embrace it and overcome the challenges that arise working together. Future generations of families will benefit so much from this, and I am once again proud that Scotland is leading the way. Thank you.
Daniel Johnson, followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Rona Mackay, at the beginning of her speech, accused opposition parties of casting doom and gloom. Can I respectfully say we are not? The reality is we are months away from delivering the 1140 hours, but we need a quantum leap in terms of the capacity of the system in order to deliver that. The Minister talked of 50,000 children already receiving 1140 hours, but didn't acknowledge the fact that is only 40% of the number of children that will be required to receive it just in August. She talked about the number of staff that have been recruited are in place, but didn't acknowledge that at the start of this year, only half the staff that we need to deliver the 1140 hours had been recruited. 30% of the staff that we need to be recruited will have to be recruited over the summer. And on top of all of that, only 30% of the additional buildings required have been built. And while she talked about contingency plans in place, a fifth of all the buildings which are incomplete do not have a contingency plan at all. The reality is, the reason we're having this debate is that we need to double our capacity in 5 months to deliver it. And it's not nonsense. Those are the numbers. If you're like to make a intervention, I'm happy
Keith Brown.
I say it's nonsense because he may be talking about Scotland in general, but you've heard from Rona Mackay about the situation in her area. In my area, more than 60% of it's been delivered now. The rest will be delivered by August, and the same is true in Stirling. So it's not true across the country.
Daniel Johnson.
There may well be places which are prepared, but the Audit Scotland report is very clear. The numbers I'm quoting from are directly from the report. These are the systems for the system as a whole. So we have to ask ourselves, is such a leap achievable? Is such a leap advisable? That's the importance of this debate, because one thing I would absolutely agree with members on the government benches, there is nothing more important than the start that we give our children. The benefit of delivering this to our children could be huge. The benefit to families is huge. The benefit to tackling poverty, both in terms of the child experience, but enabling families to get to work is huge. And those things benefit us all. But when we are asked whether or not it's reasonable to provide a guarantee, we are months away from this being delivered. It is only right that we on the opposition benches question what will be delivered. And if you look at the detail, I think nothing is more graphic than the graph on page 23, Exhibit 6, which shows the number of buildings complete and those that need to be achieved before the delivery of the policy. And there is a cliff edge over the summer. We have to have a huge leap. And what it shows is that 20% of the buildings won't be complete at all by the start of August. 20%, and that's if we stay on track. And so that's why the issues around contingency are so pressing, because even on plan, we're not going to have the capacity that we needed. And a similar case is this for the workforce. We've only half the number of staff in place, 27% to be recruited over the summer. Those are the facts and the figures from the report. And yet we see, when we look at the number of training places across the multiple routes, this have not increased significantly since 2014. And that is why the report points to the fact there is cannibalisation within the sector, why we see independent providers losing staff to local authority providers. And overall, what we have to question is what impact all of this has on quality, because that is what matters. When you see such rapid expansion, when you see staff being poached from one setting to another, it is the quality that suffers. And again, it is the quality that's in question when you look at the funding of this policy. For too many settings in too many local authority areas, the underlying assumption is a rate of 5.31 per child per hour, a figure that was arrived at in 2016, 4 years ago. Even if we just take it on the most simple assumptions, since then, the living wage has increased by more than 10%, and yet 5.31 is still the rate that is being used in many local authorities. And what that does is has an impact on the quality able to deliver. It also assumes a 6-to-1 ratio. It makes no allowances for supervision or administrative or training requirements of sickness, or the fact that in partner providers in the third sector and independent sector, that they are very often providing year-round provision. So you have to ask whether or not that rate is sustainable and whether it will deliver the quality. And it's why you hear the situations outlined by both Beatrice Wishart and Michelle Ballantyne. And it's ones that I hear, because partner providers have too many provisions and requirements, and say to me that they feel straitjacketed by the requirements of local authorities. And that leads to a situation which Beatrice Wishart outlined, where essentially you have all or nothing. You take all of your provision from one provider or not at all, because quite simply, providers, whether they're a local authority or whether they're independent, cannot afford to make that provision unless parents take all of the provision through that one provider. Ultimately, the government needs to come forward with a very clear, a very evidence-based assessment of where we are on this policy. They need to point out how the living wage will be delivered, because the living wage and funding it adequately, making sure that there's proper funding across all providers, is the only way that we will deliver quality. We are 5 months away from the delivery date of this, but there is a mountain to climb. We need clarity, we need honesty from the government, because we all want this to succeed, but there's an awful lot of reasons why we doubt that the government will. Thank you.
Fulton McGregor, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It gives me great pleasure to speak in this debate. Jamie Green started off by saying that this is a policy that is broadly supported and it's cross-party support, and I think the other members have already mentioned that, and they're right to. And I actually think that the motion in the government amendment is perhaps one of those cases where they're not as far apart as they might seem, and also what the debate so far might tell us. The Tory motion talks about certain risks, which is in the report to buildings, in relation to buildings and staff, and the government amendment talks about making steady progress. So perhaps, as everybody, I think, has said, this is an issue where we all need to work together on. I'm going to make a bit of progress, but I'll maybe come back to you. But for me, I want to focus, Presiding Officer, on what constituents are saying to me. And generally, as we've heard, people are positive, making plans and feel this will benefit them, their families and work-life balance. Indeed, I'm off the age where I've got children of nursery age. Myself, my friends have also, many of them are in that position. And I know that generally the talk amongst us and other folk that I know feel that this is a very good policy. I'm, however, glad that the Minister has recognised it's an ambitious task and not easy to deliver in full, and we do need time. Because in my area of North Lanarkshire, I think the struggle has been real. Just weeks ago there I had to write to the Chief Executive after many constituents had contacted me. Their main issue was that many council nurseries were offering either 8 AM to 12:45 or 1:30 to 6 PM. Now, that means that they might have to move to another nursery which was offering the full day. So I think North Lanarkshire are doing a kind of patch up where some nurseries are offering full day and some are offering these hours. Now, it might be no big deal, you might say, because you could involve, you could go to another nursery, but it could involve taking a child out of the nursery that they're already in a routine where they are settled. It might mean splitting siblings, not just now, because I want to make this point, or meaning that they are at a nursery which is not their catchment school. And there have also been concerns raised when people contacted me about the hours being spread over 48 hours in North Lanarkshire and not aligned to the school holidays. Now, I'm still awaiting a response from North Lanarkshire Council. Unfortunately, I want to be clear, this is not a dig NLC. It's difficult for them and they need to do something to make it work. I mean, we ourselves have accepted we can get our first preference option and moved on to something that does work. But I don't think it's well, like, some of the other parties have said today, that we can also put the blame, if you like, at the government's door either, because we talk in here a lot about local decision making, and then when local decision making does happen, and maybe it's not working excellently in various areas up and down the country. We're up in arms in the Chamber, and I think it just comes back to the point I made at the start. Really, to make this groundbreaking policy work, we've all got to work together across parties and all different levels of government. I'm just wanting to make progress just now, Mr Green. I do apologise. I've also been contacted by local private nurseries and raised their situations in here too. The Minister may recall that. Indeed, part of my representations last year formed part of a whole number. It certainly wasn't just that, but a whole number of measures that the government in North Lanarkshire Council agreed to that led to improved relationships between these providers and NLC. And I certainly know that from speaking to them that there has been that improvement. And I know there still is issues. And as Rona Mackay said, it's something that we do need to get right. I'll bring Jamie Green in now if he wants.
Sorry, I missed that. Jamie Green.
Chatting away there, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the member for taking mention? And yes, he's right. There is cross-party support for this policy. However, based on his comments, why is it therefore that the government took the entire wording of my motion from that to Parliament, deleted it, replaced it? Which bit of the Audit Scotland report that I quoted does the member disagree with? And why does he think the government deleted it?
Fulton McGregor.
I think it's more a question, rather than getting into the report itself, it's more a question of emphasis. The emphasis in the Tory motion is one that I would say is negative. It's my own opinion, I'm entitled to. It's a negative narrative about a positive policy, and the government one is positive. I said at the start that you could probably find some common ground. Presiding Officer, moving on, this weekend we celebrated International Women's Day, and I want to take some time to talk about the gendered nature of childcare in Scotland, as others have already done, like Alison Johnson. It's gendered in terms of women still doing more of the day-to-day care of children, and members will be aware of my campaign for increased paternity or paternal leave to bridge this gap. It's a major barrier for work and study, and that's why this policy is so important to get right. But for the purposes of this debate, we're talking about childcare workforce and the stereotypical perception that women are more naturally suited to childcare work, which results in significant overrepresentation of women among the early learning and childcare workforce. Again, a point that's already been made very well. So it's not hard to understand how the childcare provision has become a critical policy for addressing the gender pay gap. The sector is often historically characterised by low pay and poor working conditions, further aggravating this pay gap. And I do welcome the steps that the Scottish Government have taken, including additional college and university places in 2019 and 20 academic year, and the uptake of modern apprenticeships. But I want to end, Presiding Officer, very briefly on saying that I'm delighted that the government motion pays tribute to our dedicated staff and workforce, and hopefully that alone will get the support of the Chamber. I don't really see how it can't, because no other motion recognises that fact. And I want to end by speaking about one particular example, a nursery centre that I went out to last week, and I said that I would, the next time I spoke in the Chamber, I would mention them. The Stepping Stones Family Learning Centre in Steps, and I'd recommend it as a place to visit for the Minister if she has time. I was there for World Book Day, I have to say, reading a bunch of nursery age kids that aren't my own. I was pretty nervous, but I think that's good for us as MSPs to learn and see what our early learning practitioners are doing day in, day out, and the great work. But there were so many positive things about this learning centre, including the play-based approach in the nursery, their forest that they have locally that they use to get outdoor experiences. An absolutely fantastic centre, and that is actually reflective of centres across my constituency. And I don't have time to get into them all today, and I can see you asking me to stop, Presiding Officer. So on that note, I support the government amendment, and I hope we can all work together to make this policy work. Thank you.
Ryan Whittle, followed by Sandra White.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to once again have the opportunity to speak on the progress of the rollout of this vital service. I think it's true to say that the rollout of 1,140 hours of free childcare to all 3- and 4-year-olds and disadvantaged 2-year-olds, as Jamie Green said at the start of his speech, has the full support of every MSP from all parties across this chamber. I think the implementation of this programme has the potential to be transformative in so many ways, such as the battling inequality, tackling poverty and the stubborn attainment gap. And it could be such a major factor in tackling activity and social inclusion, healthy eating and health education. I was really pleased to hear Alison Johnson talk about the potential for growing your own food and the idea of building nurseries without kitchens, I think, is very alien to me. So you know how, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm so passionate about our youth having access to these kind of things. I think when we discuss things like mental health crisis, when we discuss the drug and alcohol addiction crisis, when we discuss all the ill health statistic that Scotland has, the unwanted lead on, all the solutions must begin with a better start in life, that early intervention. To me, Deputy Presiding Officer, these are the real implications of getting this policy right, of how crucial it is to get the delivery of this programme properly right. However, Deputy Presiding Officer, in recognising that every party supported the introduction of the 1140 hours of free childcare, we also have to highlight the unprecedented fact that every party except the SNP has voted in this chamber, highlighting its concerns in which the policy is being implemented. This isn't a political issue. It's far too important to play politics with, because we all want this to work. But for 2 years, we have been raising the concerns of partner nurseries with the Minister. Alison Harris and I facilitated a meeting with representatives of partnership nurseries and the Minister. And we were told, quite unceremoniously, we just didn't understand. I think the Scottish Conservatives used their debating time last year to again raise these concerns, and all we got was, everything is fine, you just don't understand. Now we have an Audit Scotland report telling us exactly what we've been telling the Minister for the last 2 years, that there is a staffing shortage, that aggressive recruitment campaigns by local authorities have just encouraged staff to migrate across from private nurseries. Private nurseries who have spent time and effort developing that talent and delivering quality care. There's a local nursery close to me is sitting at less than half capacity because of the number of staff that have left, while the local authority is building another nursery just down the road. This is an Audit Scotland report that says the choice is being taken away from parents, which is exactly the opposite of what the policy is supposed to deliver. It's supposed to be a partnership, building capacity across the sector. But the danger is that years of quality childcare, along with that dedication and experience, could be lost. And the thing is, Deputy Presiding Officer, if we do lose that capacity and that experience, it will not be easy or quick to replace. Just as the positives are significant, as I've said, the potential impact of getting it wrong is just as significant. Inequality across regions depending on the different behaviours of councils. I think the impact of not getting that wraparound flexible care on parents' ability to work and earn will be stark. And I think the Minister herself recognised the importance of this policy, its potential to be transformative. But if the partnership nurseries are forced to close, there will not be the capacity to deliver that transformative policy. That is driving an inequality, Minister. And I find it incredible to hear the Minister continue to plough the same old nothing to see here line in the face of all the evidence. The sector is telling us otherwise. Minister, we have consistently tried to bring the concerns of the partnership nurseries to you, to highlight what is a postcode lottery across Scotland. That capital spend on partnership nurseries seems to be secondary to the spend on council facilities. It might be working in your own backyard, Minister, but surely with this Audit Scotland report, you will finally lift your head out of the sand and take a proper look at what's happening across the sector, not what you want to happen. It is absolutely vital, Deputy Presiding Officer, that this policy works for every community. If the Minister won't listen to members in this Parliament, if the Minister won't listen to the sector itself, I ask her, will she finally listen to the Audit Scotland and take the measures asked for, even at this late stage? And I just hope it's not too late for you to take the action that is required. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Sandra White, followed by Alec Rowley. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I hope you'll bear with me if I sort of not a history lesson, but slightly anyway. When my children were young, and that obviously wasn't yesterday, we didn't have any childcare, not unless you lived close to family who could watch your kids, or you could afford a nanny. But none of these were available to me. And all that was available was a morning session or an afternoon session, 1 day a week, usually held in your local church. And like Alison Johnson, you would go along as well and make sandwiches or whatever it was. And basically, it was just somewhere you could go with your kids. Because, you know, socialisation was very important, as well as obviously the other aspects of childcare. Now, these closed in public holidays and in school holidays also. So there was nothing really available during that time. So the only thing that I could do at that particular time was I set up what I called play schemes in my local area. I worked with the local community as well, which was fantastic, and the local authority who gave us some kind of funding. And we did go on to be very, very successful in that respect. However, through time, the funding was withdrawn and we couldn't continue with the play schemes. And that presiding officer led me to join a political party, because I was asked to stand for the council and try and get some money and continue these play schemes. And I did. I joined the SNP at that time, and I won a council election, and I won it by 16 votes. So I suppose you could say that lack of childcare has brought me into this place in the political world. Some people might say that's a good thing, and some people might say it's not quite so good, but that's really what led me to come into politics at that particular time. And in stark contrast to those days, we now have, thanks to previous governments, and particularly predominantly, I think, to this SNP government, universal free early years childcare, which does support what I would say modern families. I'm not saying I wasn't modern, but at that time there wasn't a lot. So I'd say modern families with their differing aspects. And, you know, some of the figures about since they elected, the SNP government has introduced, I believe, some of the most forward-thinking and innovative improvements to early years and childcare. 2007, free childcare hours sitting at just 12.5. This was increased to 16 hours a week for all 3 to 4-year-olds, extended to 2-year-olds from low-income families. That's a very important point. And the government wants now to go further, increasing free childcare hours to 30 per week or 11,040 over the year. I will take an intervention. Michelle Ballantyne.
I agree, although we refer to it as 30 hours a week, if you work full-time and you get 6 weeks annual leave, it actually drops to just over 24 hours, which if you include travelling time means you could only work for 22.
Sandra White. I completely take on board what the member has said. And this is one of the reasons that I'm constantly still supportive of childcare. And I don't want to keep going back to when I was younger and my kids were younger, but it is an improvement for what we had before. And you're talking about travelling time. I think these aspects do have to be looked at. But I want to go on further, and I thank the member for that intervention. And as I said, they want to increase it to 1,140 over the year. And I think everyone, as you said before, can agree that it's a transformational impact on families across the country and for our children as well. And I think, yep, it will be a difficult thing. I think we'll have to look at it. I think that's been admitted by the government as well. I mean, the scale and ambition of the policy, you know, it will prove, I think, to be, yeah, take an intervention. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
I thank the member for taking an intervention. On the basis that obviously there is an acceptance that this is an ambition, what is it in the Conservative motion that she, or the Audit Scotland report, that she actually disagrees with?
Sandra White. I don't think anyone disagrees with some of the stuff in the Audit Scotland report. I think what we disagree with, and I think it's a strong word to say disagree, what I'm concerned about with the Conservatives' motion is that it's not ambitious, it's an attacking motion. I don't want to read, but if even you had said something like, you've got demands urgently, if you'd said work with other parties or something, I think that may have came across a wee bit better than that. I'm just saying that was my concerns. As I've already said, it will prove to be challenging, but it is ambitious. And we are a party of ambition. Ambition for our children in Scotland and ambition for this country as well. And I think you have to look at that. And that's something, unfortunately, which is lacking in the motion from the Conservatives. I must say I do agree with what Mary Fee has said in her amendment in regards to the real living wage. I think that's absolutely right. But I do get concerned, and I do disagree with Brian Whittle, what he has just said. It seems to be you're talking more about the private sector than actually even looking after the kids in any other sector. And I'm sorry, I think I would have taken an intervention. Can I take an intervention? Okay. Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the member for taking that intervention. The issues that are being raised by the private sector because it's supposed to be in a partnership, and it's really important that to deliver the capacity, they need to work in tandem. And the reason I raised that the partnership is that's not happening. So that's the only reason I've talked about the partnership. It's important to deliver across the sector.
Sandra White.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, you talk about the sector, but you have obviously constantly mentioned the private sector. And if the public sector, which is local government, is putting forward, have children's academies as well, under nurseries, if they're putting forward better salaries, better conditions, surely it's up to the private sector to marry that and not ask the public sector to go lower. And I think, certainly from what you had said, Mr Whittle, that's what I was taking, the intention, that's what I took out of it. And I think maybe a less talk about just the private sector and maybe a wee bit more praise for some of what's coming forward from local government as well. I know I've got to finish shortly. Basically, I think it's something we should be proud of. We should be looking forward to it. We should be ambitious. Audit Scotland said maybe we're too ambitious, but I've always said from the very beginning, if I hadn't fought against, you know, basically not having any childcare and the ambition to do something, then possibly I wouldn't be standing here today. Maybe Mr Whittle will be saying that'd be a good thing. I don't know. I'm sure he wouldn't be doing that. But as I said, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I think everyone thinks that all children should have access to quality early years childcare and education along with that as well. And I'm sure this government has the ambition to put this forward and provide it despite the challenges that we're facing. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Alec Rowley, followed by Keith Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There is much evidence available for policymakers that supports the view that early learning and childcare is crucial for all children, and is why I support the actions and direction of the government along with the local authorities in Scotland and the action that they are taking. The early years of a child is a critical time when their rapidly developing brains are ripe for learning, and recent research suggests that up to 90% of the brain development has already taken place before the child starts primary school. The amount and nature of stimulation and interaction children receive in these years makes all the difference, and that is why access to quality learning and early learning is so important. So in policy terms, this is the right thing to do, and it is important that the emphasis on good quality is one that must be at the fore of this provision. This is not something that can be delivered on the cheap. Given that the current provision of early years and where we're at and trying to move it forward, there are big challenges to overcome, both in having the facilities that will be needed and having the staff that will be needed. So in terms of the concerns noted in the Conservative motion, noting the audit report that choice and flexibility will not be fully implemented by August 2020, I would make 2 points. First, the Conservatives should be making the case for the end of austerity and for investment in both capital and revenue funding coming from the UK government and an end to the cuts that we have seen. There is no point of defending failed Tory austerity, then coming in here and making massive demands that cannot be delivered because of that failed Tory austerity. The second point is that when I look at what's happening in Fife, I would have to say there is a mixed picture between communities of the provision that is there. There will be many communities, in my view, where the kind of flexibility and choice that is envisaged will not be available by 2020 August, mainly due to the fact that there is not enough investment that is needed for the infrastructure to make that happen. So this ambitious programme will take time, but let us be in no doubt, it is absolutely the right thing to do. I want to turn to the amendment in Mary Fee's name. If there is one thing we know for certain, it is that the quality of the staff will be crucial for the success of the early years programme. That must mean putting in place a minimum standard of qualifications, making clear that to work in early years is to have the opportunity to have a career that is rewarding people with the training, the skills and the qualifications, and ultimately with a decent pay. This is a point picked up by the brief from Close the Gap, when they say, in the early learning childcare context, the low pay and poor working conditions found in the sector were a key theme identified in the independent review of Scottish early learning childcare workforce and out-of-school childcare workforce, with more than 3/4 of practitioners and stakeholder organisations' responses highlighting tackling the low pay as being important for raising the status of the workforce. They go on to say the undervaluation of work done by women, such as in early learning childcare, is a key strand linking together the cause of the gender pay gap, occupational segregation, women's unequal share of caring, and pay discrimination. Now, with the right levels of investment, I believe more and more of the early years childcare can and should be provided directly in the public sector and in the third sectors. But for now, we should be clear that a minimal standard for pay and qualifications should be introduced across all sectors. But in the end, I want to end where I began. This is the right thing to do for our children and for our communities. To quote from research prepared from the European Commission, they say, this interest in the early years is inspired by a rapidly expanding body of scientific research into different disciplines that points to substantial economic, social, educational and developmental benefits of participating in high-quality early childhood education and care. These benefits are not limited to the children involved, but extend to society at large. At the level of the individual, participation in high-quality early childhood education and care is associated with higher earnings, greater educational attainment, improved social integration and better health, among other advantages. Moreover, for parents, it is found to encourage labour market participation, especially of mothers, in addition to educational and other impacts. At the social level, there are ample potential benefits as well, ranging from reduced spending on welfare and lower crime rates to higher tax revenues, improved social cohesion. In other words, the benefits are both widespread and long-lasting. So this is a good thing to do. There are massive challenges, but we are making massive strides in the right direction thanks to all the staff out there who are working to make this happen. We need more resources. Let's try and get those more resources going in through the public sector.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. Call Keith Brown to be followed by Liz Smith. Keith Brown.
Presiding Officer, there is no question that the Audit Scotland report raises concerns, and that's quite right, and that members in this chamber have also raised concerns, and that's quite right, as is their right to challenge the government on the policy. However, I think the Tory party's motion today is nothing more than a poorly disguised hit job on a policy that will be transformative for the children living in this country, and it's designed to unduly worry and concern families across Scotland as if they didn't have enough to worry and be concerned about as things stand. Nothing in the Audit Scotland report suggests that the 1,140 funded hours expansion cannot be delivered on time, yet Tories in this chamber see fit to undermine the significant progress being made to introduce a bold and hugely progressive policy that will almost double the amount of childcare available for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds. And that will be double the amount that's currently on offer for hard-working families in England from the Tory UK government. It's easy for the Tories to cherry-pick from the Audit Scotland report, completely ignoring that it clearly states that the Scottish Government and councils are making steady progress to deliver the expansion of funded early learning and childcare, and that we are in fact on course to meet plans to deliver the increased hours by August 2020. Jamie Green's motion raises concerns over buildings. In terms of infrastructure, we are ahead of what councils had predicted this time last year, with 40% of all projects completed, providing over 6,000 new places for children. Additionally, the Scottish Government has already implemented the Audit Scotland recommendation on contingency planning. I will give way here.
Daniel Johnson.
that point, will he acknowledge the Audit Scotland report? It makes very clear that there will be 20% short in terms of the buildings delivered by August, and they won't be delivered until a year after the policy is meant to be implemented. Will he acknowledge that 20% figure?
Keith Brown.
I'm happy to acknowledge that figure if you will acknowledge that the Audit Scotland report suggests there's nothing to stop this being delivered on time, as described. It's also true to say that the Scottish Government has already implemented the Audit Scotland, no, I must move on, the Audit Scotland recommendation on contingency planning, with all local authorities putting in place plans for capital projects due to be completed this summer. And one thing I don't think that has been mentioned so far, it may have been, and if it has been, I'll apologise, is I do have a concern in terms of some of the plans, given that the situation that we face with coronavirus is bound to have an impact right throughout the economy. That is a concern which I have. But going back to the report, out of the 10 recommendations in the report, 7 refer to work already underway before the report was published, with 1 already complete. And decisive action by a government is not only committed and able to deliver this expansion by August, and not least in relation to staffing and the sustainability of both the private and third sector. We've heard a lot about staffing levels. In my area, they started an early years academy. They've had tranches of apprentices being taken on each year in the last 3 years. They have made sure that existing staff have went for additional qualifications. That's decisive action by a local authority. We've not heard enough, I think, about staffing levels, and let's not forget the circumstances in which we're attempting to roll out this expansion. Over 7% of childcare workers in Scotland come from the EU, and due to Scotland being dragged out of the EU against their will by a hard-right Tory UK government, it will now inevitably become harder to recruit. I know they don't like it, but facts are shields at Winnie. It will now inevitably become harder to recruit the skilled childcare workers we'll need, a point explicitly made in the Audit Scotland report, which they keep referring to. The Government put forward plans for a sensible immigration plan for Scotland that would have assisted in the recruitment of childcare workers for this expansion. So will the Tory MSPs here now back our calls, or will they continue to stand up for their Westminster bosses? And despite all that, we are again on track to meet the required numbers by August, with over half the total requirement already met in September of last year. And the report itself welcomes the progress made by councils to recruit the workforce needed to deliver on the expansion. As the Minister pointed out in this chamber, the apprentice recruitment process has been successful, with increases of 21% in the first year and 24% in the second. Training opportunities and routes into the childcare sector have been increased, and we now have a record 40,000 strong workforce. Many people in my constituency, the majority of people, are already benefiting from this increased expansion in childcare. I've taken one already. The sustainability of private and third sector partners is a key element of the flexibility offered by this expansion and ensures their future is a key priority. And that's why local authorities continue to work with them to recruit additional staff, also assisting with advertising and helping with retention. And taken together, we can see that the Government is working well with partners, reacting and adapting where necessary to address these concerns and deliver on the expansion by August this year. Presiding Officer, we know that childcare can be one of the most expensive items in the household budgets of many families with small children, and these costs hit those on low incomes and those least able to afford it the hardest. And come August, for the first time ever, parents of eligible 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds will have 1,140 hours of childcare that will save them up to £4,500 per child per year. That is completely transformative. And as part of a wider progress in Scottish welfare, it will have a material impact on the lives of millions across Scotland. The expansion will help tackle child poverty, improve the well-being of children and parents, and support parents into work, study or training. And the value of this can't be overstated. And the truth is, the Tories in this chamber are unable to imagine implementing policies that improve the lives of the low-paid. Yes, I will take an intervention.
Amy Halker-Johnson.
Thanks very much. I'm grateful to the member for taking that intervention. Does he agree, as he kind of suggested earlier in one of his own interventions, that this policy may be delivered in some areas but won't be delivered across Scotland in August?
Keith Brown.
No, I'll refer for the third time to the paragraph in the Audit Scotland report that says there's nothing that will make this impossible to deliver by August this year. So it's in the Audit Scotland report. It might be an idea to read the report and see if you agree with that. The truth is the Tories in the chamber are unable to imagine implementing policies that improve the lives of the low-paid. Under the watch of their colleagues at Westminster, the welfare state entitlements and opportunities for ordinary working people are being cut and slashed, and England has the highest levels of child poverty. And who governs in England? While the Government here has worked hard to protect Scots from the worst of the Tory UK Government, they've imposed a welfare system that has left 1.4 million people destitute. With the Scottish Government introducing the revolutionary Scottish Child Payment, the Tories instead introduced the bedroom tax and the rape clause, policies that target the most vulnerable in our communities. And it's no coincidence that child poverty in Scotland has dropped the most. Policies like this help to empower families living in Scotland. Well, apparently, child poverty has increased in England due to the SNP. There's a new one from the Tories. Try and work out the logic of that one. Policies like this empower families living in Scotland. It frees up valuable time for parents to provide for their children, undertake studies or reskill. For the Tories, politics is all about maintaining inequality, imposing austerity and cutting taxes for the rich. It's no surprise that they seek to undermine the work of this government to improve the lives of those living here. It is the most progressive and ambitious childcare policy in the UK that will provide the flexible support that families in Scotland deserve, unlocking new opportunities for the many. And I'm very pleased to speak in support of the Government amendment today.
Thank you very much. I call Liz Smith, to be followed by Joe McAlpine.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I get this debate back on track to the matter in hand? Jamie Green made very clear that exactly 2 years ago, the Scottish Conservatives used our Chamber of Business at that time to debate the findings of the 2018 Audit Scotland report. And we did so because we believed that some of the findings needed urgent attention from the Scottish Government. 2 years on, and another Audit Scotland report, and I think it's very clear that right across the Chamber, there are members here who believe that there is still quite a considerable number of issues standing in the way of the successful implementation of this flagship policy. Now, no one at all doubts the considerable importance that all parties in this Chamber attach to the expansion of childcare, and I am very surprised, actually, that the Scottish Government chose to take out that line in the Conservative motion. But surely one of the key challenges is to strike the right balance between ensuring that we are extending the number of hours available, but also the qualitative issues in terms of ensuring that there is much better accessibility and flexibility, both of which are so important to parents. In fact, I think parents would argue that these are the most important things to think about, because these will be the defining issues, Minister, about whether or not Scotland succeeds in delivering the policy that is, quite rightly, your ambition. I accept that. It is your ambition. The real problem is how we actually deliver it. Because we know from the 2018 Audit Scotland report that there was real concern, genuine concern, about the mismatch between demand and supply. And that whilst the ambition of the childcare policy was very much in line with the national strategic objectives, the Scottish Government had implemented the increase in hours without actually comparing the cost and the potential outcomes of expanding that childcare, or without looking actually at different economic models of childcare and how they would compare in terms of delivery. In other words, it had not really identified exactly which measures would indicate the success or what baseline data was available. The Scottish Government had not defined what it meant by high quality childcare, which obviously is the crucial thing for parents. And as a matter of priority, and quite rightly, parents will talk about the right numbers of qualified staff. Now, my colleague here, Liam Kier, quoted to the Minister the phrase that she had used, that she said that she will give, and I quote, an absolute guarantee that we will find ourselves with enough staff by 2020. That was his question. Ministers, you said you were confident that that was going to be the case, but you couldn't, Minister, provide the evidence to support that. And I challenge you again, when you're summing up in this debate, to provide that evidence, because I don't think it's here. And if we look at what happened between 2008 and 2018, there was a very considerable reduction in the staff who were involved in this sector. Nor should we forget that there is an additional cost in that training. So it's something that I think we still need answers to before we can be sure of that confidence that you predict. But whilst the quality of staff is probably the biggest concern for parents, so too is the learning environment. And here lies the issue about providers and the building space available. Because there are fewer early learning centres and childcare services than there were a decade ago, a decline that has predominantly, unfortunately, occurred in some of the most deprived areas, and that's coincided with the decline in the number of childcare services rated good or better, which now stands actually at a lower rate than it was that decade ago. And that's a concern to me, because that reflects on the quality, not just on the quantity of the hours available. And related to that, and we've had many people in this debate talk about this already, is the major point about the provision. because the fear amongst the private sector providers that local authorities are in a position to call the tune. It is not a genuine partnership for so many of them in the way that they want it to be. And it has to be. Minister, you're quite right to talk about the fact that if we're going to make this policy work, it has to be a combined effort from the private sector, the public sector and the voluntary sector, but it will not work if one of them is not on a level playing field. Now, the Scottish Conservatives very firmly believe that this issue of primary importance is about the provision, and it is about ensuring that within the local authorities there is a genuine understanding that they will not be able to deliver unless they engage with the private sector in a way that suits the flexibility and the accessibility, as well as the actual number of hours that are to be provided. And that's, as the Minister knows, a point that comes very much from fair funding for our kids, who were so influential in providing the early evidence to this point. Now, Presiding Officer, just to sum up, it is abundantly clear that the latest reports have laid bare the extent of the challenges we face and the failures on the part of the Scottish Government to address them. That's not to say that they've highlighted some progress that's been made. That's not what we're arguing about. There has been some progress, and the Minister is right to highlight that. But as Daniel Johnson rightly pointed out, that progress is not nearly as much as it will have to be to deliver this policy. And it's on that basis, Presiding Officer, that the Conservatives are arguing very strongly that you must, Minister, listen with very considerable care to what is being said, not by us in this chamber, but by what the sector is being told, because they're the ones at the end of the day who are on the ground and have to deliver this.
Thank you very much, Joan McAlpine, before we move to closing speeches. Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much. Liz Smith, who I respect, and I'm glad she acknowledged the progress that had been made, began her remarks by referencing the 2018 Audit Scotland report. But the Scottish Government acted quickly to address the points made in that report in February 2018, particularly the gap between local and Scottish Government estimates highlighted in the report. By April 2018, three months after that Audit Scotland report, an agreement was reached with COSLA on a multi-year revenue and capital package to fully fund the 1,140 hours expansion. Audit Scotland recognises that the Scottish Government, COSLA and other stakeholders are continuing to work well together at a national level. And I think it's important to point out that the most recent Audit Scotland report uses capital projects from October, and significant progress has been made in the last quarter, which isn't referenced in that report. In January 2020, 40% of all projects were already complete, providing 6,100 new places, and that's 3% ahead of what councils predicted last year. And yes, I will.
Ms. Smith.
The member is quite correct in what she has just said. But that progress is not the progress that we need to actually deliver this policy in August. That's the issue. That's why we've got a second Audit Scotland report out just recently that is flagging up at some of exactly the same issues that we had in 2018. Does the member recognise that?
Joan McAlpine.
Well, I would repeat the point that my colleague Keith Brown made, in that there's absolutely nothing in that second Audit Scotland report that says that we will not meet the number of hours, the 1,140 hours by August. And I note that the Government have already implemented the Audit Scotland recommendation on contingency planning, which also references the point that Liz Smith has made. And all councils now have these contingency plans for all critical capital projects due to complete in summer 2020. But I think we should get back to the core of what we're really debating here, and that is that access to high quality care and education is foundational to a child's development and ability to reach their potential. It provides invaluable opportunities for parents to study, train or work at times that may have been impossible without access to childcare. The difference that early learning can make for a child can be huge, especially in terms of boosting their confidence and social skills, and introducing a child to high-quality childcare gives them access to a variety of activities and experiences that may have otherwise been unavailable. An important part of the expansion is the move to increase children's access to outdoor play and learning, which is made possible through funding of more than 860,000 to the Inspiring Scotland charity to support their work with local authorities and the ELC sector to expand outdoor learning spaces, which is a really, really exciting project. By delivering the expansion of funded childcare to 1,140 hours, we are unlocking a crucial component in closing the poverty-related attainment gap in Scotland. And again, to repeat what my colleague Keith Brown said earlier, we are miles ahead of what is happening in Tory-run England. The Scottish Government has been working with councils to ensure that nurseries in Scotland's most deprived areas benefit from an equity and excellence lead, which is an additional graduate post for highly qualified candidates. This commitment has created 435 new graduate level posts across Scotland. The progress that has been made in working towards our highly ambitious targets to expand early learning and childcare in Scotland has already begun to benefit so many children and families, and it's very encouraging to know that 50,000 children are accessing more than the minimum 600 hours of early learning and childcare to which they are currently entitled, and soon all 3- and 4-year-olds across Scotland and around 1/4 of 2-year-olds can benefit from almost twice as many funded hours each year. Central to the expansion is the move towards a funding follows the child approach, which will enable parents to choose from a range of ELC providers. And it's certainly my impression that considerable progress has been made in that regard in the last 2 years, providing flexible access to options from public, private, third sector, as well as childminding settings, gives families the power to choose childcare which best suits their children's needs. No, I'm just closing up actually. Private ELC providers will make a larger contribution than previously forecast, up from 4% to 26%. So there has been considerable progress made with regards to that flexibility. And I know that from using private providers as well as local authority providers myself when I was at the age where I had children of that age, that it's really, really important to have that flexibility. By working very closely with the stakeholders, the Scottish Government has finalised a national standard which all providers delivering the funded hours will be required to meet. And this will allow parents the confidence in knowing that their child will be offered a high-quality experience. By investing in our children and prioritising high-quality early learning and childcare, we are providing opportunities for all our children to learn and have fun and thrive. And I think that's something that the peevish pessimists behind this Conservative motion today should bear in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we move now to closing speeches. Can I call on Ian Gray to wind up for the Labour Party?
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Let me start by congratulating Jamie Green for bringing this debate today. I think there's a lot going on, a lot in the news, but this is a very important report on a very important policy, and so it's right that we devote this afternoon to debating it. Most speakers have acknowledged the simple fact that this is a policy which has support right across the chamber. But I think it's also the case that across most of the chamber, there's also significant concern still around the delivery of it, given that parents expect this childcare to be delivered and available from August. The key finding of the Audit Scotland report, of course, is that in the period between now and then, we will be required to find half the workforce increase and to deliver half the new infrastructure for the whole programme. Daniel Johnson pointed out that, this is only months away. Looking at my own calendar, the Scottish Government have 146 days left to make good on this promise. Time is very short. Now, I for one hope that the commitments made are delivered on and the assurances the Minister has given do reflect the reality of the situation, because otherwise parents and members across the chamber will rightly be asking why contingency actions weren't taken now rather than assurances simply being given that everything is fine. So let's remind ourselves, as many speakers have done this afternoon, of the task over the next few months. 34% of places are still required to be physically created by July and 79% by August, after which a further 20% are supposed to be ready. And about half of the additional staff which was needed at the start of plans, that's over 2,200, have still yet to be recruited. And we've heard from a number of different colleagues and different parts of the country the concerns over the significant challenges being reported, particularly by the independent and third sector providers. These figures are a real and considerable challenge for the Scottish Government, and they need to acknowledge that. They really do need to acknowledge it. You know, several SNP speakers have accused colleagues of doom and gloom, but it's not us expressing these concerns. We are reflecting the concerns of Audit Scotland in their report. You know, I was reminded of, I can't remember the detail of the script, it was too long ago, but an episode of Yes Minister where Sir Humphrey demonstrates how the most extreme catastrophe can be described in the most diplomatic, polite, laconic and understated language in order to hide its severity. And Audit Scotland is a bit like that. No matter how serious the situation they believe they are describing, they will always do it in a way which is positive and polite and diplomatic. But I tell you this, when Audit Scotland say plans are critically dependent on achieving much, or they say create significant risks, or they say likely that some aspects will not be fully implemented, I say to Rona Martin, who says nothing suggests this won't be delivered on time, that is Audit Scotland suggesting that they do not think this policy is going to be delivered on time. When Audit Scotland carries out an audit in 2018 and comes back within 18 months to follow it up, that is Audit Scotland saying that they are not convinced that their initial audit has been responded to. And you know, I think the biscuit goes to Keith Brown, who took the opposite approach to language when he described a motion which simply quotes Audit Scotland as a hit job. That's just hyperbole and a refusal to acknowledge what Audit Scotland is saying to you. Look, we've also got some experience, haven't we? Because when the funded hours were expanded to 600 hours, we know that it took a long time before that policy was actually fully and flexibly delivered. So it's entirely fair to be concerned, especially when we look at something like childminders, as Mary Fee was talking about. I mean, at the moment, childminders, only 4% of childminders are actually providing funded hours. That's 404 children. Yet councils are predicting that they need childminders to provide funded hours for almost 2,500 children. It is really hard to see how we get to that. And yes, I say to a number of speakers, councils are doing a lot. My own council has an early years academy in their schools too. They held a jobs fair just the other day. But the challenge is huge, and it is complicated by what Daniel Johnson described as the cannibalisation of the sector. Alec Rowley is right. The living wage and conditions is the key to getting this right. But I want to take the last few seconds that I've got to go to an issue that Beatrice Wishart raised. This Parliament, there is a group of parents who will not, under any circumstance, benefit from the 1140 hours because they have chosen to defer entry to Primary 1 for a child whose birthday is before the turn of the year, and they will be refused funding. And this Parliament has already agreed that this is unacceptable. Yet since then, a whole further cohort of parents have been put through this unacceptable hurdle for those who believe that their child is not ready for Primary 1 yet. And I take no pleasure in the fact that my council is the worst at turning these requests down. But I have to acknowledge that my council tells me they are simply implementing the law as it stands. It's time that law changed, and the Minister needs to tell us now when and how she is going to change that law so the 1140 hours are available to every young person prior to primary 1. Presiding Officer, the motion is a perfectly reasonable one which reflects a report from Audit Scotland. It should be supported and the government motion should be rejected.
Thank you very much. And I call Marie Todd to close for the government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The benefits of this policy will be transformational, far-reaching, long-term and felt by children, by families, by parents and by communities. In fact, the recent international evidence suggests the benefit for children is not just lifelong, but intergenerational, benefiting the children of those who experience high-quality early learning. We have been clear from the beginning that the primary driver of the expansion is to improve and to reduce gaps in children's lifelong outcomes. We're investing in quality and nurturing early learning and childcare because it is the foundation from which every child can develop socially, emotionally and educationally, enabling them to reach their full potential, as many members around the chamber have recognised. Now, change that ambitious requires proper programme management and governance. If colleagues read the Audit Scotland report carefully and objectively, that's what they'd see. This government cannot be accused of complacency. We are recognising and actively managing the risks. Yes, I'll give way.
Daniel Johnson.
Minister for giving me. Paragraph 1 states, this creates a significant number of risks about getting enough people and buildings in place to deliver the expansion. Paragraph 3, important workforce challenges remain in all sectors. Paragraph 4, putting in place the necessary infrastructure remains a big risk. She talks about programme management. How is the government going to mitigate those risks that I've just read out from the very first page of the Audit Scotland report?
Minister. Audit Scotland made 10 recommendations last week. 7 of those relate to actions that we have already identified and which Audit Scotland asked us to continue. And we have already implemented an 8th in relation to contingency plans for critical capital projects. Our active management of the risks is a team approach, working closely with COSLA, with the Improvement Service, with the Scottish Futures Trust and, of course, with local authorities. As I said very clearly in my opening remarks, by January this year, councils had robust contingency plans in place for all critical projects due to complete this summer. Over half of contingency plans will be provided from established ELC facilities. This may mean temporarily bringing more capacity into use at these facilities. 30% of the contingency plans involve changing the operating model at the existing or nearby nursery, which means that session times and lengths will change. Other contingency plans involve using local authority or community facilities for a short space of time. These might include using spare classrooms or communal spaces in local rooms. Yes, I'll give way.
Michelle Ballantyne.
Could the Minister explain where the staffing capacity is coming from for these contingencies?
Minister.
I'll come on to that. Most importantly, all local authorities are working closely with the Care Inspectorate to ensure quality is not compromised in any of these contingency plans. The expansion cannot be delivered without the contribution of the private and third and childminding sectors, who are forecast to deliver more than a quarter of funded provision from August 2020. The principle of provider neutrality is at the heart of funding follows the child because we are putting quality first. It is important to note that in their careful scrutiny of the ELC expansion, Audit Scotland did not report concerns about the rates paid to funded providers during early phasing, nor the rates set from August 2020 onwards. In fact, if we look around the UK, the rates in Scotland compare very favourably to the rates in the other UK nations. And in Wales, the nationally agreed rate of £4.50 per hour is considered commercially viable. Average rates have increased by over 26% in the 2 years of phasing. Glasgow City Council increased hourly rates for funded providers by more than 50%, a year ahead of full implementation. Last year, we placed in Spice an overview of all local authorities' hourly rates for the early phasing of 1140. We intend to repeat this exercise for the 2021 financial year and to find out from local authorities how they went about setting sustainable rates. I am sure that colleagues will agree that it is important that this information is in the public domain. In relation to the members, Mary Fee raised a concern about childminding. The latest data from the Scottish Childminding Association showed a fourfold increase in the number of childminders approved to offer funded early learning and childcare. We are funding research into the childminding workforce in partnership with the Kier Inspectorate and the Scottish Childminding Association. Mary Fee is also quite right. In their report, Audit Scotland commented on the fact that the Scottish Government cannot legislate for the real living wage because employment law is reserved to the UK Government. This so-called loophole is indeed the case in the current constitutional arrangement. But we are doing everything in our power to create the conditions for a real living wage ELC sector and setting our ambitions unashamedly high. Our policy framework, developed through careful consideration with the sector, is designed to make it very difficult to deliver funded ELC without meeting the real living wage ambition. Local authority sustainable funding rates for the delivery of funded ELC will reflect the real living wage, thanks to our multi-year funding agreement with COSLA. From the very beginning, this expansion has focused continuously on improving the quality of ELC our children experience. Our plan to do that, the Quality Action Plan, was published in October 2017. Within the next few months, we'll have delivered all of the 15 actions it contains to support the workforce, to support our children's learning environments and play pedagogy, to support home learning and family learning. We have been relentless in maintaining the focus on quality as the expansion progresses. The International Council of Education Advisors has recognised Scotland's potential to be world-leading in this field. The quality is so central to our offer that it can only happen thanks to the dedication and hard work of frontline staff up and down the country, caring for children, adapting to change and welcoming new members to their teams. Local authority teams managing the expansion in their areas, leading at local level, one of the biggest ever social infrastructure transformation programmes in public services in recent years. Early learning and childcare providers across the private, third and childminding public sectors who demonstrate professionalism and passion every day. Let me finish with some provider testimonials, because I would like to add some more balanced testimonials from providers into today's debate. A playgroup in Argyll and Bute told us, "We have received lots of support within our setting with funding for better resources in order to obtain better outcomes for children." A playgroup in Edinburgh. 2 years ago, we were at the point of closing our nursery. Oh, you don't want to hear from providers? You don't want to hear the providers' view? Oh, 2 years ago, we were at the point of closing the nursery. Our numbers were forecasted to be low into August 2018, and having struggled financially for a number of years just to cover our basic running costs, we felt that the group was no longer viable. For many years, we had been relying on fundraising just to bridge the gap and on staff goodwill, as we could not pay a decent rate for the job. The whole thing had reached breaking point. The pilot scheme for us meant that due to the increase in the hourly rate paid by the council, we have been able to give our staff a decent pay increase. And although we were not able to reach the pay and benefit levels of our council equivalent, we were able to improve our rates. Playgroup in Angus. The support we received from Angus Council has helped us upgrade our facilities. We will be having work done on the building, on both interior and exterior, creating new opportunities for outdoor education. Now, whilst it is right that the Parliament scrutinises and challenges progress in delivering such an important public service, I would ask colleagues not to undermine the commitment of those working tirelessly to make a success of the expansion in local authorities, ELC settings and supporting organisations across Scotland. I welcome Parliament's support for expanding early learning and childcare. I thank colleagues for their contributions today. And in closing, I would encourage each and every one of you to support your local authority and local providers as they work to transform children's lives.
Thank you. And can I invite Alison Harris to conclude our debate for the Conservative Party? Alison Harris.
Okay. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm happy to be closing for the Scottish Conservatives in this vitally important debate on the expansion of funded childcare. I would like to start by thanking my colleague, Jamie Green, for bringing this motion to the Chamber. He and others who have already spoken are absolutely right to highlight the grave concerns noted in last week's Audit Scotland report, and I will touch on a few of these in my speech. So, here we are, Presiding Officer, now in our final 5 months before the Scottish Government's ambition to expand funded childcare to 1140 hours becomes a requirement for local authorities across Scotland. Today, we have heard of the many problems faced in relation to the rollout, not least, as has been evidenced in the Audit Scotland report, is the sheer lack of adequate planning that was done before initiating such a policy commitment. And this was also mentioned by Mary Fee and many others today. During this rollout, I have been focusing on the exclusion of the private, voluntary and independent, or PVI sector. But no doubt the Minister is of the view that progress reports show that there is a greater proportion of the PVI sector involvement in the delivery than was originally planned, and would undoubtedly have this charted as a success. But let me reassure the Minister, having spent a great deal of time working with the PVI sector, they are still feeling excluded from this expansion, despite just 5 months to go. A point which makes me reiterate 2 things. Firstly, the context is crucial. When these reports talk about the originally planned level of PVI sector involvement, it is important to note that in many local authorities, the bar for this was very low. I remember meeting council officials who were shocked at the very idea that the PVI sector nurseries would want to be included in the capital expansion programme. Secondly, the proportion of entitlement being delivered at PVI settings does not equate to the partnership or engagement that was intended, even at the outset. Take the revenue funding rates offered from councils to partner providers for delivering the entitlement hours. This is a basic, fundamental aspect of provision. Let us focus on the most common planned rate for August 2020, that being £5.31 per child per hour of entitlement. This figure was derived from a 2016 report based on cost estimates that, at a particular time, but costs have changed since 2016. Take, for example, the requirement to pay the real living wage, which was not taken account of in 2016. Whilst £5.31 is the most frequently offered rate, across Scotland we are seeing a varying picture. In Perth and Kinross, for example, the current rate was £4, and the planned rate, reflecting increases from August 2020, will be £5.05. Compare this with West Lothian Council, who will be paying providers £6.80 per hour from the beginning of the new financial year. So after accounting for the cost of providing meals, this could mean that an independent nursery in Perth would receive almost £2,000 less per child than an independent nursery based in, for example, Linlithgow. This just does not strike me as fair. It is not a level playing field. And even when considering that these different rates will have different cost provisions, it's just wrong. Surely this differential cannot be acceptable. It's no secret that there has been a mass exodus of PVI sector workers moving across to council-led nurseries. This has been due in large to the low funding rates being offered within the PVI sector, who cannot compete with these salary levels, as my colleague Brian Whittle mentioned in his speech. I remember last year in North Lanarkshire Council, an entry-level practitioner vacancy was being advertised at £26,000 to £29,000. This was almost £10,000 more than the market average at that time. In fact, I don't even hear who. I'll need to keep going, sorry. In fact, I've heard firsthand how some nurseries are struggling to break even. In December last year, figures revealed that between the start of 2018 and September 2019, more than 150 nurseries in the PVI sector were forced to close these businesses. This was not a temporary measure, this was permanent. Businesses failed and parents are left in the lurch. Yeah. And let's not forget the PVI sector provide more than 25% of places that you're looking for these children. Towards the end of last year, I conducted a survey which was aimed at the PVI sector throughout Scotland. In response to one of the questions in the survey, just 1 in 5 providers, that's 20%, actually believed that the 11-40 hours model would leave their business in a sustainable position. 80% were unsure if they would be able to remain in business due to this current expansion. So let's think about that statistic for a minute. 80% of those who responded were actually unsure if they would be able to remain in business due to the current expansion. And the reality is that despite my questioning, the Minister remains vague when it comes to offering any support, advice or guidance. You heard me mention the loss of business and parents left in the lurch. But more importantly, what about the children, and where do these children go when these businesses are forced to close? Where is the flexibility under these circumstances? Where is consideration given to the flexibility that means having your 4-year-old daughter receive her entitlement hours at the same nursery as her 1-year-old little brother? Whilst I know the intention of the Scottish Government was to maintain and enhance flexibility, it is without question that as a consequence of this current rollout, it is sadly going the other way. Flexibility will reduce, and this was mentioned by Beatrix Wishart. The Scottish Conservatives have long argued that flexibility should be given a greater focus. It's currently almost exclusively the PVI sector that provides such flexibility. But it's also the PVI sector who are the casualties of this rollout. Maybe not the original intention. However, the Audit Scotland report also highlights the risk to flexibility that the expansion poses. Just last week, in this very chamber, I asked the Minister about the Audit Scotland report's findings, that flexibility and choice will not be in place by August. I asked about the report's exposure of the lack of any meaningful attempt to monitor the staffing drain from the PVI sector to councils, an issue I have raised in this chamber countless times over the past 2 years. I also asked about the uncertainty over the future of paid childcare for children under 3. And I asked about the rushed planning and guidance from the outset. The Minister did not respond on flexibility, or staffing, or indeed the provision for under 3s. Instead, everything was downplayed and assurances were given that all would be well. This has been the approach from the beginning. Yeah. Minister, ignoring these problems will not make them go away. Yeah. It's time to change this approach, and it's time to tackle things head-on. And I think Alison Johnson was absolutely correct to mention the scale of the challenges facing the sector, because the rollout in its present form is simply not working as planned. Meaningful and genuine partnership isn't happening. Business sustainability is at risk, and that ultimately affects places for children. There are severe staffing issues, as mentioned by many speakers this afternoon across the chamber. Flexibility and choice is likely to not be in place by August 2020. And indeed, there are significant infrastructure problems. This is actually very sad. It's the implementation of the policy that is flawed, not the policy in principle. Team ELC, seriously, Minister? If the Scottish Government do not willingly accept this, then the message is very clear. We have a Scottish Government who are set to fail our children and early years in Scotland. Yes, we have. Let us make this right before it's too late. And that's why I am supporting the motion in the name of my colleague Jamie Green today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our debate on the expansion of funded childcare. The next item is consideration of Business Motion 21210 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau setting out a business programme. Could I invite the Minister to move this business motion? Oh. Is that terminal working? Anyway, it was moved. The question is that motion, no other members indicated they wish to speak. No one has indicated they wish to speak. So the question is that motion 21210 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you very much. The next item is consideration of 6 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Could I invite Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move motions 21206, 21207 and 21208 on approval of an SSI, 21209 on subcommittee membership, 21214 on designation of a lead committee and 21215 on substitution on committees.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And these questions will be put at decision time. So we turn to decision time now. I would remind members that if the amendment in the name of Marie Todd is agreed, then the amendment in the name of Mary Fee will fall. So the first question is that amendment 21177.3 in the name of Marie Todd, which seeks to amend motion 21177 in the name of Jamie Green on expansion of funded childcare be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote. Members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 21177.3 in the name of Marie Todd is yes 58, no 61. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 21177.1 in the name of Mary Fee, which seeks to amend the motion in the name of Jamie Green, be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to a division. Members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 21177.1 in the name of Mary Fee is yes 61, no 58. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that motion 21177 in the name of Jamie Green as amended on the expansion of funded childcare be agreed. Are we agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to division. Members may vote now. The result of the vote on motion 21177 in the name of Jamie Green as amended is yes 61, no 58. There were no abstentions. The motion as amended is therefore agreed. Now, I propose to ask a single question on the 6 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Does any member object? That's good. So the question is that motions 21206 to 21209, 21214 and 21215 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you very much. That concludes... Oh, point of order, Jamie Green.
Thank you. The Parliament has just voted to demand of the Government to respond to the Audit Scotland report. Can I quite simply ask if the Government will respond to the Parliament on how they are going to address the serious issues contained in this report, as instructed to do so by the Parliament today?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr Green. As Mr Green, and as probably most members will know, motions of this Parliament are an expression of the will of this Parliament. There is an expectation that the Government will respond. I'm sure it will in due course. And on that note, we conclude decision time. We'll move shortly, however, to members' business in the name of Linda Fabiani on Marie Curie's Great Daffodil Appeal 2020, for which I can see we've got a very full gallery. We'll just take a short pause to allow members and ministers to change seats before we move on to members' business.